The air in the private dining room of Ethelgard's, a place so exclusive it made royalty feel underdressed, was thick enough to choke on. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Kenjiro Tanaka, a man whose net worth eclipsed the GDP of a small country. His face, a mask of cold fury, was fixed on the trembling restaurant manager. The billionaire's demand had been simple, yet impossible. He would conduct his entire multi-million-dollar dinner negotiation in his native Japanese. But nobody spoke Japanese. Not the manager, not the sommelier, not the head chef. With every passing second of silence, Tanaka's quiet rage grew, threatening to shatter careers and reputations. Then from the shadows, a voice, soft yet clear, broke the tension. The reservation had come in a week prior under the name KT Industries, a deceptively simple booking for what was turning out to be the most stressful night in the 15-year history of Ethelgard's. The restaurant, perched on the 40th floor of a San Francisco skyscraper, was a cathedral of modern gastronomy. Its patrons were the titans of Silicon Valley, old money inheritors, and the occasional A-list celebrity seeking refuge from the public eye. Its manager, a perpetually anxious man named Arthur Harrison, prided himself on flawless, anticipatory service. Tonight, that pride was curdling into sheer terror. Kenjiro Tanaka had arrived precisely at 8 p.m., flanked by two men. One was a younger, American-educated executive named David Chen, whose job was clearly to bridge the gap between his boss's world and the West. The other was an older, impeccably dressed Japanese man, Mr. Sato, who moved with the silent, watchful grace of a shadow and whose expression hadn't changed once. Tanaka himself was not a physically imposing man, but he radiated an aura of immense, compressed power. He was in his late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a stillness that was more unnerving than any overt display of aggression. He was the founder and CEO of a global technology conglomerate, a self-made legend who had clawed his way from post-war poverty to the zenith of the financial world. His reputation was twofold. He was a visionary genius, but he was also notoriously, ruthlessly demanding. The trouble began before the appetizers. Harrison had personally greeted them, his best maitre d' smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Tanaka, it is an absolute honor to welcome you to Ethelgard's. We have prepared our finest table for you, with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge." Tanaka had given him a look that could freeze Mercury. He didn't respond in English. Instead, he spoke in a low, formal Japanese, the words precise and cutting. David Chen, his liaison, winced almost imperceptibly before translating, a strained smile on his own face. "Mr. Tanaka appreciates the view," Chen said, his voice a little too loud in the hushed room. "He would like to conduct the entire evening service in Japanese." Harrison's smile faltered. "Of course, I'm afraid my Japanese is a bit, well, non-existent, but I can certainly—" "That is not what he asked," Chen interrupted, his own discomfort palpable. He was clearly just the messenger. "He wishes for the service staff who will be attending to him, the waiter, the sommelier, to communicate with him directly, in his language. It is a matter of respect." The word respect hung in the air like a guillotine. Harrison's mind raced. He had staff who spoke Spanish, French, a little Mandarin, even a busboy who was fluent in Russian. But Japanese, in a city with a significant Japanese population, it was a humiliating, shocking oversight. I will see what I can do, sir," Harrison stammered. He had scurried back to the kitchen, his heart pounding against his ribs. A frantic interrogation of his staff yielded nothing. The head chef, a celebrated culinary artist named Julian Croft, could barely say arigato. The sommelier, a Frenchman named Pierre, just shrugged with Gallic indifference. Harrison sent in his most experienced waiter, a man named Robert, who had served presidents and princes. The instruction was simple. Just be as deferential as possible, smile, nod, point at the menu. Use Mr. Chen as a translator. It was a catastrophe. From a discreet service alcove, Ava Martinez watched the disaster unfold. At 26, Ava had been a waitress at Ethelgard's for nearly 2 years. It was a good job, the tips were phenomenal, and it paid the bills while she tried to figure out what to do with a life that had been violently knocked off course. She was diligent, quiet, and professional, known for her preternatural calm in a high-stress environment. Most of her colleagues saw her as just another competent server, unaware of the world she carried inside her. She saw Robert approach the table, his posture radiating insecurity. Tanaka spoke to him. Robert just smiled blankly and looked towards Chen. Tanaka's eyes narrowed. He spoke again, a little sharper this time. Robert, panicking, simply pointed at the wine list. Tanaka slammed his hand flat on the table. The sound wasn't loud, but it was so sharp, so violent that it silenced the entire room. Even the low hum of conversation from the main dining hall seemed to dip. "Kore wa busaho desu," Tanaka spat, the words dripping with contempt. Mr. Saito, his stoic right hand, finally moved, leaning in to whisper something to his boss. Tanaka ignored him, his gaze fixed on the terrified Harrison, who had rushed back into the room. "Your man is an idiot," Tanaka said, switching to flawless, icily accented English. The sudden change was jarring. "He does not understand me, and he makes no effort. This is not service. This is an insult. You are wasting my time." "This deal," he gestured to the papers in a briefcase held by Chen, "is predicated on precision, understanding, and respect. If your establishment cannot even master the simplest of these, how can I trust my prospective American partners to grasp the nuances of a billion-dollar merger? Perhaps this was a mistake. We are leaving." Harrison's face went white as a sheet. Losing this one customer wouldn't just be embarrassing. It would be a reputational stain he could never wash out. Tanaka was known to be friends with half the billionaires in the city. A bad word from him could ruin them. "Mr. Tanaka, please, I am so deeply sorry. 1,000 apologies. Let me offer you everything on the house. I will attend to you personally. Do you speak Japanese, Mr. Harrison?" Tanaka asked, his voice dangerously soft. "No, sir, Then you are of no use to me." Panic, pure and absolute, seized the room. David Chen looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Harrison was visibly trembling, his career flashing before his eyes. It was a train wreck in slow motion. From her alcove, Ava felt a strange sense of clarity descend upon her. She saw the fear, the arrogance, the cultural chasm that had opened up in the middle of the room. She thought of her small apartment, her mounting student loans, the ghost of a life she had left behind. But more than that, she thought of the old woman in a small Kyoto garden who had taught her that language was not just words, but a bridge between souls. And she knew with a certainty that terrified and electrified her that she was the only person in the building who could build that bridge. Taking a deep, steadying breath, she smoothed the front of her simple black uniform and stepped out of the shadows. As Ava moved, time seemed to stretch and warp. The hushed whispers of the kitchen staff behind her faded into a dull roar. The opulent decor of the dining room, the crystal chandeliers, the dark wood, the glimmering cityscape outside the panoramic windows, all blurred into an impressionistic smear. Her entire universe narrowed to the 10 yards of plush carpet between her and the table. Mr. Harrison saw her first. His eyes, wide with panic, darted towards her, and he made a frantic, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand. "Stay back. Don't get involved. You have no idea what you're doing." He saw a young waitress, perhaps hoping to be helpful, about to wander into a minefield. The last thing he needed was another incompetent employee inflaming the situation. Ava met his gaze with a look of calm resolve and gave a tiny, respectful shake of her head. She wasn't asking for permission. Her approach was silent and deliberate. She didn't scurry like a frightened mouse or stride with unearned confidence. She walked with a measured grace, her posture straight, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. The men at the table, engrossed in the slow-motion execution of Arthur Harrison, didn't notice her until she was standing a respectful distance away. Robert, the disgraced waiter, had already fled. Harrison stood alone, a man on an island, being slowly submerged by the tide of Kenjiro Tanaka's wrath. "Mr. Tanaka," Harrison began again, his voice cracking, "if you would just allow—" "Enough!" Tanaka commanded, his voice low but carrying the finality of a judge's gavel. He pushed his chair back slightly, the legs scraping against the floor with a sound that was unnervingly loud in the tense silence. "Saito-san, call the car." Mr. Saito nodded once, reaching for his phone. It was now or never. Ava took one final step forward and bowed. It wasn't a bob of the head or a clumsy imitation. It was a perfect, formal Japanese bow. Back straight, eyes lowered, hands correctly placed. A bow of profound respect and apology that she had practiced 1,000 times, not in a class, but in the homes and businesses of Kyoto. The motion was so unexpected, so authentic, that it stopped everyone. Mr. Saito paused, his thumb hovering over his phone. David Chen's jaw went slack. Harrison stared, utterly baffled. And Kenjiro Tanaka, for the first time that evening, looked intrigued. His cold fury was pierced by a flicker of curiosity. He watched her, his head tilted slightly as she slowly rose from the bow. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the oppressive silence with the clarity of a bell. She didn't speak to Tanaka immediately. She addressed the room, a formal pronouncement of intent. The Japanese was flawless, not just grammatically correct, but tonally perfect. It was imbued with a deep, intrinsic understanding of keigo, the complex system of honorifics and humble language that is the bedrock of Japanese etiquette. It was the language of five-star hotel concierge in Tokyo, of ancient tea masters, of people who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of respectful communication. The phrase translated simply to, "My deepest apologies. Please allow me the honor of serving you." But the way she said it conveyed so much more. It was a formal acceptance of blame on behalf of the establishment and a humble request for the privilege of setting things right. A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. Harrison looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Who was this woman? This was Ava, the quiet waitress who mostly worked the lunch shift, the one who kept to herself. Where in God's name did she learn to speak like that? David Chen's eyes were wide with disbelief. He had spent years and a small fortune on Japanese tutors trying to achieve that level of fluency and politeness, and he was still a clumsy amateur by comparison. Mr. Saito, the stoic shadow, betrayed his surprise with a single sharp intake of breath. His usually impassive face was a canvas of astonishment. He looked from Ava to his employer, his eyes asking a silent question. But the most profound reaction came from Kenjiro Tanaka himself. He stared at Ava, his penetrating gaze sweeping over her simple black uniform, her plain, neatly tied-back hair, her calm, unassuming face. He had expected a parade of fumbling, apologetic Americans. He had expected mediocrity and misunderstanding. He had not, in a million years, expected this. He slowly settled back into his chair, the intention of leaving momentarily forgotten. He folded his hands on the table and studied her, a master jeweler examining a flawless, uncut diamond that had been found in a bucket of gravel. For a long moment, he said nothing. He let the silence hang, testing her. He was watching for any sign of fear, of bluffing, of a student who had memorized one good line. Ava did not fidget. She did not look away. She simply stood, her posture one of respectful readiness, her gaze directed at a point on the table just in front of him, as etiquette dictated. Finally, Tanaka spoke, his voice no longer icy but sharp and inquisitive. He posed his question in a rapid, highly formal Japanese, using obscure, almost archaic phrasing. David Chen, struggling to keep up, mentally translated, "You use a level of polite language that seems far too valuable for a place like this. Where did you acquire it?" It was a test, a dart thrown to see if her skill was just a thin veneer. Ava didn't hesitate. Without missing a beat, Ava replied, her Japanese as fluid and natural as his. Her choice of words was deferential, yet confident, a delicate balance that was in itself a masterclass in communication. Harrison looked desperately at David Chen, who quickly provided a whispered, awestruck translation. She says, "You are too kind. I lived in Kyoto when I was a student. I am happy if what I learned there might be of service to you." The mention of Kyoto was a masterstroke. It was not just a city, it was the cultural and historical heart of Japan, a place where tradition and etiquette were preserved with an almost religious devotion. To say one had learned Japanese in Kyoto was like a chef saying they had trained in Paris, or a classicist saying they had studied in Athens. It carried immense weight. Kenjiro Tanaka's expression shifted again. The piercing curiosity was now mingled with genuine interest. The test was over. An interrogation had begun. Kyoto, he repeated in Japanese, the word rolling off his tongue with a hint of nostalgia. He gestured to the empty chair that Robert had abandoned. Sit down. It was an order, not a request, but it was also an invitation into his circle. Ava gave a slight bow of acknowledgement. Excuse me. She moved with practiced efficiency, retrieving her small ordering notepad from her apron pocket and taking a seat. She did not sit fully back, but perched on the edge of the chair, a posture of attentive readiness. Mr. Harrison watched, his mind reeling. He felt like a man who had been trying to put out a chemical fire with a water pistol, only for a firefighter in full hazmat gear to appear out of nowhere. He took a few steps back, melting into the shadows, content to let this bizarre, miraculous scene play out. The wine, Tanaka said, pointing a finger at the leather-bound tome Pierre the sommelier had left on the table. Your sommelier is French. He knows grapes, perhaps, but does he know how they pair with the palate of a Japanese meal? Does he understand umami? Does he know what to serve with yuzu-crusted sea bass versus a wagyu steak with a sansho pepper reduction? He was testing her knowledge now, moving beyond mere language. Ava didn't flinch. She picked up the wine list, her eyes scanning the pages with an expert's speed. A fascinating question, Tanaka-sama, she replied, using the highest honorific for his name. For the sea bass, the citrus notes of the yuzu are quite forward. A traditional choice might be a dry junmai ginjo sake to cleanse the palate. However, if you prefer wine, I would not recommend the Sauvignon Blanc that a Western palate might favor. The acidity would compete with the yuzu. Instead, I would suggest the Austrian Gruner Veltliner from the Kamto region. It has a similar citrus profile, but with a white pepper note and a minerality that will complement the fish's delicacy rather than overpowering it. She paused, then turned a page. As for the wagyu, the sansho pepper provides a unique, tingling numbness and a citrus aroma. A bold Cabernet would be the obvious choice, but it can be brutish. I believe the true soulmate for this dish would be a Barolo from Piedmont. The Nebbiolo grape has powerful tannins to cut through the richness of the beef, but it also possesses complex notes of rose, tar, and cherry, which will dance beautifully with the exotic spice of the pepper. Silence. David Chen was scribbling furiously in a notebook, trying to keep up. Mr. Sato's eyebrows had risen so high they were in danger of disappearing into his hairline. Kenjiro Tanaka stared at Ava, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time that night. It transformed him, softening the hard edges and revealing a glimpse of the man behind the corporate titan. He chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. Incredible, he said in Japanese. You are not a waitress. You are a poet. He turned to Mr. Saito. Saito-san, we will have the Gruner Veltliner with the first course and the Barolo with the main. And please, he added, his eyes twinkling, ensure our hostess here tastes them both before they are served. It was the ultimate sign of respect. He was not just accepting her recommendation. He was elevating her to the status of a trusted advisor, making her a participant in their meal rather than a mere servant. The dynamic of the room had been completely rewritten. The fuming billionaire was gone, replaced by an engaged, fascinated host. The terrified manager was a forgotten ghost. The power which had been so menacingly concentrated at the head of the table was now shared with the quiet young woman who had dared to speak. As Ava rose to place the order, her mind was a whirlwind. This was supposed to be a simple shift. She was supposed to serve food, clear plates, and go home to her tiny, lonely apartment. But as she relayed the order to a dumbfounded Pierre, explaining precisely why he was to decant the Barolo for exactly 1 hour, she felt a part of herself she thought was long dead begin to stir. It was the part of her that was alive, curious, and deeply in love with the intricate dance of culture, language, and taste. A part of her that had been buried under 2 years of grief and monotony. When she returned to the table, the atmosphere was relaxed, almost convivial. Tanaka had gestured for his associates to put their papers away. He was no longer a CEO in a tense negotiation. He was a man enjoying a rare and unexpected pleasure. He looked at Ava as she poured the water, her movements economical and precise. "Tell me, Martinez-san," he said, using her last name with the respectful Japanese suffix. "My associate tells me you lived in Kyoto as a student. What was a young American woman doing so far from home?" The question was simple, but the answer would change everything. Ava placed the last water glass on the table with a soft click before answering. She chose her words carefully, her gaze respectfully lowered. "I was studying, Tanaka-sama," she began in Japanese. "My major was in East Asian studies with a focus on classical Japanese literature. But my true education began outside the classroom." "Oh?" Tanaka prompted, leaning forward slightly, his entire attention now focused on her. Even his associates seemed to be holding their breath. "I found a part-time job to support my studies," Ava continued, her voice taking on a softer, more reminiscent tone. "Not in a restaurant like this one, but in a very small, very old tea house in the Gion district, run by an elderly woman named Mrs. Sato. She was over 80 years old and had been running it since she was a young woman. She needed someone to help with washing dishes, sweeping, simple tasks. She didn't speak a word of English, and my Japanese was at the time quite academic and clumsy." She paused, a faint smile gracing her lips. "Mrs. Sato was a very strict teacher. She corrected my posture, my grammar, the way I held a cup. She taught me that serving tea was not a job, but an art form, a conversation without words. It was about anticipating a guest's needs, creating a moment of tranquility, and showing respect through gesture and silence." Tanaka nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his eyes. The Gion district was the famed geisha district of Kyoto, a place where aesthetics and etiquette were the very air one breathed. "She taught me about more than tea," Ava went on, her confidence growing as she spoke of a time that was precious to her. "She taught me about wabi-sabi, the beauty in imperfection and impermanence. She taught me about kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold, believing that the object is more beautiful for having been broken. She would say that words like bowls can be broken, but that with care and the right gold, they can be mended to create something stronger." As she spoke, a memory surfaced, vivid and clear. She was no longer in a sleek San Francisco skyscraper, but in a small tatami-matted room, the scent of matcha and old wood in the air, the gentle sounds of a shishi-odoshi, a bamboo water fountain, in the garden outside. Mr. Saito, the stoic executive, cleared his throat softly. When he spoke, his voice was filled with a surprising warmth. "Sato-sensei's tea house in Gion? The one with the small cherry tree by the entrance?" Ava's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, you know it?" Saito allowed himself a small, rare smile. "My wife is from that neighborhood. We had our first date there, 30 years ago. The matcha was unforgettable, as was Mrs. Sato's glare if you held your cup improperly." A shared, genuine laugh rippled around the table. The last vestiges of tension evaporated, replaced by a warm and unexpected connection. They were no longer a billionaire and his staff interrogating a waitress. They were three people sharing a fond memory of a tiny corner of Kyoto. Tanaka looked from Saito to Ava, a thoughtful expression on his face. "So you learned your Japanese not just from books, but from the heart of our culture. You learned its spirit, not just its structure." "I tried to, sir," Ava said humbly. "I was there for 4 years. I had hoped to stay longer, to pursue a master's degree, but I had to return home. My father became very ill." She didn't elaborate, but the quiet finality in her tone spoke volumes. The grief was still there, a soft shadow behind her eyes. It was the reason her meticulously planned life had derailed, the reason a brilliant student of Japanese culture was now serving overpriced steak to tech billionaires. The dream of a life in Japan had died with her father. Tanaka heard the unspoken story. He fell silent for a moment, his gaze distant. The jovial atmosphere sobered, replaced by a quiet, shared understanding of life's unexpected tragedies. He, too, had known loss. He had built his empire from the ashes of his family's post-war struggles. He recognized the resilience in her, the same strength that had forged his own path. The sommelier arrived with the wines, his face a mixture of awe and confusion, as he presented them to Ava for tasting, as instructed. She handled the ritual with an understated professionalism that would have made him proud, swirling, sniffing, and tasting before giving a crisp nod of approval. The first course was served, and the meal began in earnest. The conversation flowed easily, guided by Ava. She was no longer just a server, but a cultural interpreter, a conversationalist, and a gracious host. She spoke with Tanaka about the subtle artistry of the chef's plating, relating it to the principles of Japanese ikebana, or flower arranging. She discussed the history of the Barolo region with Mr. Saito, who turned out to be a passionate enophile. She even managed to draw a shy David Chen into the conversation, asking him in perfect English about his experiences working for a Japanese company. She was effortlessly, brilliantly, bridging the gap between their worlds. As the main courses were cleared away, Tanaka leaned back in his chair, a look of deep contemplation on his face. The evening had been a resounding success. The food was excellent, the wine superb, but the experience itself had been something else entirely. It had been meaningful. He had come here tonight as a test, not for the restaurant, but for his American counterparts. He was on the verge of acquiring a promising but struggling American software company, and the negotiations had been stalling for weeks. His American team couldn't understand why he was getting caught up on seemingly minor points of phrasing in the contract, on matters of long-term vision versus short-term profit. They saw him as an eccentric, difficult old man. They didn't understand that for him, a deal was not just a transaction. It was a relationship, a marriage of corporate cultures. And he felt they did not respect his. His stunt tonight, demanding a Japanese-speaking server, was a theatrical, frustrated expression of that feeling. He had expected to prove his point by having it fail spectacularly, to then lecture his partners on their cultural ignorance. He never expected to find the solution to his entire problem waiting tables. He looked at Ava, who was quietly overseeing the preparation of their dessert order. There was one more test, a final, crucial one. This had to be more than a lucky coincidence. He needed to know if her understanding was as deep as it was wide. He gestured to David Chen. The briefcase. Chen, looking puzzled, placed the thin leather briefcase on the table. Tanaka clicked it open. He didn't pull out a contract or a financial report. He removed a single sheet of high-quality paper. On it was a short Japanese text, written in elegant calligraphy. He slid the paper across the table to Ava. "Martinez-san," he said, his voice now serious, all traces of dinner party levity gone. "This is a passage from the preamble to our company's founding charter, written by my grandfather. Our American legal team has translated it. Their version is technically correct. But it is sterile. It has no soul. I need you to tell me what it means." The sheet of paper felt heavier than it should in Ava's hands. The calligraphy was beautiful, a style that was both strong and fluid, each stroke filled with intent. The Japanese was not modern business speak. It was older, more poetic, laden with the kind of nuance that translators often miss. The air in the room grew still once more. This was no longer about wine pairings or pleasant conversation. This was the heart of the matter. David Chen leaned forward, his expression a mixture of anxiety and intense curiosity. Mr. Sato sat upright, his face unreadable, but his focus absolute. This was a sacred text for their company, and a stranger, a waitress, was being asked to decipher its soul. Ava read the passage aloud, her voice soft and measured. She read it a second time, silently to herself, letting the words in their cadence sink in. She could feel Tanaka's gaze on her, patient but intense. He wasn't looking for a literal translation. He had one of those already. He was looking for comprehension on a cellular level. She thought of Mrs. Sato, of the countless hours spent discussing classic poems by the hearth of the tea house. She thought of the Zen gardens of Kyoto, where every rock and ripple of sand held a deeper meaning. Finally, she looked up, meeting Kenjiro Tanaka's eyes directly for the first time. "The literal translation," she began, speaking in English now, for the benefit of everyone at the table, "is something like, water flows and changes shape, but its essence does not change. It moves rock and carves valleys. Our mission must be like this water, flexible yet strong, Not fighting the current, but possessing the power to eventually cut through the earth itself. David Chen nodded. That's essentially what our translators came up with. Yes, Ava agreed, and it's correct, but it's not what it means. She took a breath. The key is in the imagery. Water in Western thought is often seen as soft, yielding, sometimes weak. But in Eastern philosophy, and especially in Japan, water is the ultimate symbol of intelligent strength. It does not meet force with force. It doesn't try to smash the rock. It yields, it flows around it, it adapts. But through its persistence, its constant, gentle pressure over time, it achieves what brute force never could. It wears away the rock. It carves a path where there was none. It wins by yielding. Tanaka's eyes shone with an intense light. He nodded, urging her to continue. So, when your grandfather wrote this, Ava went on, her passion for the subject making her forget her role as a waitress entirely. He wasn't just creating a mission statement. He was outlining a philosophy. He's saying the company should not be a rigid, unyielding monolith that breaks when it encounters an obstacle. It should be fluid. It should adapt to changing markets and new technologies. It shouldn't fight its competitors head-on in a costly war of attrition. It should flow around them, finding new channels, new markets. And over time, its persistence and adaptability will make it the most powerful force in the landscape, carving its own path. She slid the paper back across the table. Your American partners, if I may be so bold, she said, her voice dropping slightly, are likely focusing on the strength part, the market disruption, the aggressive growth, the carving of valleys. They are seeing it as a mandate for conquest, but they are missing the first and most important part of the philosophy, the yielding, the flowing, the adapting. Your grandfather's vision isn't about breaking the rock. It's about becoming the water. The room was utterly silent. David Chen stared at Ava, his pen frozen over his notepad. A look of dawning comprehension was spreading across his face. Weeks of frustrating meetings, of talking past each other, of misunderstanding Tanaka's objections, suddenly clicked into place. They had been trying to sell him on a plan of aggressive, head-on expansion into a new market. Tanaka had been pushing back, arguing for a more subtle, long-term, adaptive strategy, and they had interpreted it as weakness or indecision. They weren't speaking the same philosophical language. Mr. Sato slowly, deliberately began to applaud. It wasn't loud, just a soft, rhythmic clapping that was far more powerful than any thunderous ovation. Kenjiro Tanaka did not clap. He simply stared at Ava, a profound and undisguised admiration in his eyes. He had spent a lifetime building his company on this principle, a principle he felt his own children, raised with Western educations, didn't fully grasp. He had searched for years for a bridge between his world and the new world, someone who understood that the soul of his company was not in its balance sheets or its patents, but in the simple, powerful words written by his grandfather decades ago. And he had found her, here, in a restaurant, wearing an apron, holding a notepad. He leaned back, a slow, wide smile returning to his face. It was the smile of a man who had not just won a game, but had changed the rules entirely. Mr. Harrison, he called out into the shadows. The manager, who had been watching the entire exchange with the bewildered intensity of a man witnessing a miracle, scurried forward. Yes, Mr. Tanaka. Tanaka looked from Harrison's anxious face to Ava's calm one. I trust you pay this woman well, the billionaire said, his voice laced with an amused, dangerous edge, because I am about to offer her a job, and I assure you, my offer will be substantially better. Arthur Harrison's brain stalled. The words computed, but the meaning refused to lock into place. It was as if someone had told him his busboy had just solved cold fusion. He could only stare, his mouth slightly agape, looking between the serene face of his waitress and the deadly serious expression of the billionaire. A job, sir? Harrison stammered, his voice a squeak. Tanaka ignored him, his full attention on Ava. Martinez-san, he said, switching back to Japanese, a language that now felt intimate and exclusive to their conversation. I have a problem. My company, KT Industries, is a Japanese company at its core. Its strength comes from the philosophy you just so eloquently explained. But we live and operate in a globalized, predominantly Western business world. He gestured towards David Chen. I have good people, smart people. David here graduated top of his class at Stanford. My executives in Tokyo are the best in Japan, but they are either one thing or the other. My Japanese team struggles with the Western mindset of direct confrontation and quarterly results. My American team, as you have surmised, mistakes our patience for inaction and our flexibility for weakness. They do not truly understand each other. They translate words, but they do not translate meaning. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. The full force of his personality was now directed at her, not as a customer to a server, but as a CEO to a potential recruit. For weeks, we have been trying to finalize the acquisition of an American company. It is a vital deal for our future, and it is failing. It is failing because of the cultural gap. They present us with aggressive, rigid 5-year plans, and we respond with philosophies about water. They see us as indecisive. We see them as reckless. The deal is dying in translation. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You, Martinez-san, in the past hour, you have demonstrated a deeper understanding of both worlds than my entire executive team has in the past year. You did not just learn our language. You learned our heart, our kokoro. You understand why the empty space in a painting is as important as the brushstroke. You understand why silence in a negotiation can be more powerful than words. You are the bridge I have been looking for. Ava stood frozen, her mind reeling. The clatter of the distant kitchen, the hum of the city lights outside, her own breathing, it all seemed to be happening to someone else. A job offer from Kenjiro Tanaka? It was beyond the realm of possibility. Therefore, Tanaka continued, his voice resonating with authority, I am offering you a position at KT Industries. This is not an internship or an entry-level role. I am creating a new position for you. You will be my special advisor for cultural integration. You will work directly with me and my executive teams in both Tokyo and San Francisco. Your job will be to ensure that we are not just translating words, but meaning. You will be the soul of our translations, the guardian of our philosophy as we expand globally. He named a salary that made Arthur Harrison physically sway on his feet. It was more than the manager made in 5 years. It was a life-altering, stratosphere-shifting number. You will have a housing allowance in both San Francisco and Tokyo, Tanaka added, as if sweetening an already irresistible deal. A full relocation package. You will report directly to me and to Mr. Saito. Your first task will be to review the documents for this acquisition and tell us where the gold is needed to mend the cracks. He leaned back, his work done. The offer was on the table, shimmering with impossible promise. Ava was speechless. The path of her life, which had felt like a dead-end street for 2 long years, had suddenly opened up into a superhighway. The skills she had cultivated out of love and passion, skills she thought were now useless relics of a life she could no longer have, were suddenly her greatest asset. The years of patient study, the lonely nights in her Kyoto apartment poring over classical texts, the quiet lessons from an old woman in a tea house, it had all been leading to this single, unbelievable moment. She looked at Tanaka, then at Saito, whose expression was one of quiet, profound approval. She looked at David Chen, who was beaming at her with a look of pure, unadulterated relief. Finally, she looked at Harrison, whose face was a comical mask of shock and awe. A wave of emotion washed over her. Grief for the father whose illness had brought her here. Gratitude for the old woman who had taught her so much, and a dizzying, terrifying thrill for the future that had just been handed to her. She thought of the principle of kintsugi, that something is more beautiful for having been broken. Her life had been broken. Her dreams had been shattered. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was the gold that would not just repair the cracks, but make the entire vessel shine brighter than before. She took a deep, centering breath, just as Mrs. Sato had taught her to do before a tea ceremony. She straightened her back and gave Kenjiro Tanaka a deep, respectful bow. When she rose, her eyes were clear and bright. There was no hesitation in her voice, only a quiet, powerful certainty. Tanaka-sama, she said in perfect, formal Japanese. It would be my absolute honor to accept. A profound, ringing silence descended upon the private dining room, a vacuum left in the wake of Kenjiro Tanaka's gravitational presence. The residual energy of the encounter seemed to crackle in the air, making the distant, muted clatter of cutlery from the main dining hall sound like it was coming from another world. For a moment, no one moved. Arthur Harrison stood frozen, his mind still trying to process the magnitude of the evening's events. He felt like a groundskeeper who, after a lightning strike, had discovered the scorched earth had transformed into solid gold. David Chen was the first to break the spell, letting out a long, shaky breath that was equal parts relief and disbelief. He turned to Ava, his professional smile gone, replaced by a look of genuine, almost boyish excitement. Ava, I can call you Ava, right? Martinez-san seems a little formal for colleagues. That was incredible. I've been in meetings with him for 2 years. I've never seen him like that. You didn't just save the dinner. You might have just saved this entire acquisition. He fumbled for a business card, his hands still unsteady. Here, this has my personal cell. We'll have the official offer letter from HR sent over by noon tomorrow. But if you have any questions, any at all, please call me day or night. The shift was instantaneous and absolute. She was no longer service staff. She was a critical team member. Mr. Saito, who was overseeing the collection of their briefcases, approached her with a dignified bow. Martinez-san, he began in his warm, formal Japanese. In our culture, we have a concept called go-en. It means a fateful connection, a bond that seems preordained. I believe our meeting you tonight was a work of true go-en. He paused, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Mrs. Sato often spoke of the listening heart, the ability to hear what is not said. You have that gift. It is rare. Do not lose it in the world of business. Coming from the reserved, dignified man, the praise was not just a compliment, it was a blessing, a charge to keep her unique spirit intact. Finally, as his associate stood by the door, Kenjiro Tanaka turned back for one last word. He walked to within a few feet of Ava, his gaze direct and appraising. The earlier anger was a distant memory, replaced by the focused intensity of a mentor. A final piece of advice, he said, his English precise. In my world, you will be surrounded by sharks who smell money and opportunity. They will try to flatter you. They will try to imitate you. They will not understand the source of your value. Your value is not that you speak Japanese. It is that you understand the Japanese heart. It is an authenticity you cannot learn in a boardroom. He extended his hand. Welcome to KT Industries, Ava Martinez. Ava took his hand. His grip was firm, dry, and surprisingly strong. It was a handshake that sealed destinies and moved markets. Thank you, Tanaka-sama. I will not let you down. He gave a crisp nod, then turned and swept from the room, his entourage falling into formation behind him. They left behind them a half-eaten chocolate torte, a nearly full bottle of exquisite Barolo, and a life that had been irrevocably and spectacularly altered. For a long moment after they were gone, Ava remained standing by the table. The silence rushed back in, now filled with the echo of opportunity. She ran her fingers along the smooth, cool mahogany of the table where Tanaka's charter had rested. It felt like an altar. She replayed the evening in her mind, the suffocating tension, the tremor in her own hands as she decided to step forward, the feel of the Japanese words forming on her tongue, rusty from disuse but flowing from a place deep inside her. A sudden, sharp pang of grief lanced through her excitement. She thought of her father. He had been a literature professor, a quiet man who had always supported her impractical passion for a culture an ocean away. When she had won the scholarship to Kyoto, he had been her biggest champion. Go learn the poetry, Ava, he'd said, his eyes bright with pride. Understanding how other people see the world is the only thing that will ever truly make you rich. During his illness, as their savings drained away, and her dream of a master's degree evaporated, she had felt a bitter sense of failure. She had returned home to a mountain of debt and a broken heart, taking the first high-paying service job she could find. She had traded classical Japanese poetry for taking orders of medium-rare steaks. She thought he would have been so disappointed, but now, standing in this temple of wealth, she realized the truth. He would have been amazed. Her father's definition of richness had just paid off in a way neither of them could have ever imagined. The poetry had been the key all along. A tear escaped and traced a silent path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but one of catharsis, a release of 2 years of buried grief and frustrated potential. "Miss Martinez?" Arthur Harrison's voice was soft, tentative. He had been hovering by the door, unsure of what to do. Ava wiped her cheek and turned, her composure regained. "Mr. Harrison." I don't know what to say," he admitted, shaking his head in wonder. "Congratulations is insufficient. The entire staff is buzzing. In 15 years, I've never seen anything like it." Her journey out of the private room was a slow-motion parade. The other waiters and kitchen staff, who had only heard fragmented rumors, stared at her with a mixture of awe, envy, and utter confusion. Pierre, the French sommelier, caught her arm as she passed the wine station. "Ava," he whispered, his usual arrogance gone. "He asked you about the wine? The Barolo? Mon Dieu, what did you tell him?" She simply smiled, a private, knowing smile that made her feel, for the first time, like she held a secret they couldn't comprehend. She walked into the stark, fluorescent-lit staff locker room. It smelled of bleach and old coffee. This small, windowless space had been the bookend to her days for 2 years. She opened her locker and slowly began to change. The black uniform, which had always felt like a costume, now seemed like the skin of a different person. She unbuttoned the shirt, folded the apron for the last time, and placed it on the bench. It was a formal, final farewell to the woman who had worn it. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror on the back of the door. The same tired face stared back, but the light in her eyes was different. It was brighter, sharper. The shadow of resignation that had haunted her for so long was gone, replaced by the fierce glimmer of purpose. She wasn't just Ava the waitress anymore. She was Ava Martinez, the woman who understood the poetry of water, the woman who spoke to billionaires in their own language, the woman who was about to step onto the world stage. Stepping out of the restaurant service exit and into the crisp, foggy San Francisco night was like being born into a new world. The city, which had so often felt vast and indifferent, now seemed to hum with a shared energy. The towering skyscrapers, their lights piercing the rolling fog, no longer felt like monuments to a world she wasn't part of. They were a challenge, an invitation. She hailed a cab, and as it pulled away from the curb, she looked back at the gleaming tower housing Ethelgard's. It was no longer a workplace. It was a landmark, the site of her own personal miracle. As the cab sped through the quiet streets, her mind, finally catching up to the whirlwind of events, began to race. Tokyo, a new apartment, contracts, non-disclosure agreements, learning the intricacies of the global tech industry. The sheer, terrifying scale of the responsibility Kenjiro Tanaka had placed on her shoulders began to sink in. She was being trusted with the philosophical core of a multi-billion-dollar empire. It was a daunting, exhilarating weight. She felt a flicker of fear, a whisper of inadequacy. Then she thought of her father's words, of Mrs. Sato's patient lessons, of Tanaka's final advice. Her strength wasn't in what she knew, it was in who she was. The water was finally flowing again, and she wouldn't just follow the current, she would become it. Ava Martinez's story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths are often hidden in plain sight, forged not in boardrooms, but in the quiet, passionate pursuit of knowledge. It's a story about how true communication is about more than just words. It's about understanding the heart, the culture, and the spirit behind them. Kenjiro Tanaka wasn't just looking for a translator. He was looking for someone who could see the soul of his company. He found it in the most unexpected person, proving that talent, brilliance, and wisdom can be found anywhere, in anyone waiting for that one moment to shine. What hidden talents are you holding on to? Have you ever felt completely underestimated? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more unforgettable real-life dramas.